The morning mist hung low over Windsor Castle as Prince William stood at the window of his private study, watching the groundskeepers tend to the ancient gardens below. His hands clasped behind his back, the future king's mind was heavy with thoughts that had kept him awake for weeks. The weight of the crown he would one day wear seemed heavier than ever, but today would mark a turning point that would reshape the very foundation of the modern monarchy. Catherine entered the room quietly, carrying 2 cups of tea on a silver tray that had belonged to Queen Elizabeth. She moved with the grace that had made her beloved by the British public, but William could see the concern etched in her features. They had discussed this decision countless times in the privacy of their home, away from the prying eyes of courtiers and the relentless scrutiny of the media. "Are you certain about this, darling?" Catherine asked, setting the tea down on the mahogany desk that had once belonged to King George VI. Her voice carried the weight of understanding what this decision would mean for their family, for the institution they served, and for the delicate balance of power that had existed within the royal household for years. William turned from the window, his blue eyes reflecting a determination that reminded Catherine of his late mother, Princess Diana. There was something of Diana's rebellious spirit in this moment, a willingness to challenge tradition when it conflicted with what he believed was right for the future of the monarchy. "I've never been more certain of anything in my life," he replied, reaching for his wife's hand. "The monarchy must evolve, Catherine. We cannot continue to operate as we did in the 19th century. The people deserve better, and so does Sophie." The mention of Sophie, the Duchess of Edinburgh, brought a small smile to Catherine's face. Over the years, she had watched her sister-in-law work tirelessly in the shadow of more prominent royals, never seeking the spotlight but always delivering results. Sophie's dedication to charitable causes, particularly those involving women's rights and disability advocacy, had earned her respect both within and outside royal circles. William's decision to elevate Sophie's role within the royal hierarchy was not made lightly. For months, he had observed the changing dynamics within the family, particularly following the various controversies that had shaken the monarchy in recent years. The public's trust in the institution had been tested, and William understood that meaningful change required bold action. The current system, where seniority and birth order determined influence and resources, had left talented members of the family underutilized while others struggled with responsibilities that didn't match their capabilities or interests. Sophie, despite her years of service and proven track record, had been relegated to a supporting role simply because she had married into the family rather than being born into it. William's private secretary, James Morrison, knocked softly on the door before entering. A man in his 50s who had served the royal household for over 2 decades, Morrison had seen enough palace intrigue to understand the significance of what was about to unfold. His usually composed demeanor betrayed a hint of nervousness as he approached the prince. "Your Royal Highness, the Queen Consort has requested an urgent meeting," Morrison announced, his voice carefully neutral. "She seems quite insistent about discussing recent developments." William exchanged a knowing look with Catherine. Word had apparently reached Camilla about his intentions, though he had hoped to implement his plan before the inevitable resistance began. Camilla, as Charles's wife and now Queen Consort, had spent years carefully positioning herself within the royal hierarchy. The idea of Sophie being elevated to a more prominent role would undoubtedly be seen as a threat to the established order. "Tell Her Majesty that I will meet with her this afternoon," William replied calmly. "But make it clear that my decision is final. This is not a negotiation." Morrison nodded and withdrew, but not before William caught the slight widening of the man's eyes. In all his years of service, the private secretary had rarely heard such direct language from a member of the royal family when referring to another senior royal. It was a sign of how seriously William was taking this moment. Catherine moved closer to her husband, placing a comforting hand on his arm. She understood the pressure he was under, not just from family members but from the centuries of tradition that seemed to resist any change. Yet she also saw the necessity of what he was proposing. The monarchy's survival in the 21st century depended on its ability to adapt and remain relevant to a changing society. "Sophie deserves this opportunity," Catherine said softly. "She's proven herself time and again. Remember the work she did during the pandemic? The way she connected with families who had lost loved ones? That wasn't just duty, that was genuine compassion." William nodded, remembering those difficult months when the country had been in lockdown. While others had struggled to find their footing in the new reality, Sophie had seamlessly transitioned to virtual engagements, personally calling families affected by COVID-19 and working with charities to provide practical support. Her approach had been refreshingly direct and personal, cutting through the usual royal formality to offer real comfort. The decision to elevate Sophie wasn't just about recognizing her past contributions, it was about preparing the monarchy for the future. William envisioned a streamlined, more efficient royal family where roles were assigned based on merit and effectiveness rather than simply birth order or marriage connections. Sophie's elevation would send a clear message that the monarchy was willing to change and that talent and dedication would be rewarded. As the morning progressed, William found himself reflecting on the conversation he'd had with his father, King Charles, just 2 weeks earlier. Charles had listened thoughtfully as William outlined his vision for Sophie's expanded role, but his response had been cautious. The king understood the need for change but was acutely aware of the sensitivities involved, particularly regarding Camilla's position and feelings. "You know this will create waves," Charles had warned. "Camilla has worked hard to establish her place in this family. She may see this as undermining her authority." William had expected this concern, but he also knew that true leadership sometimes required making difficult decisions that would face resistance. "Father," he had replied, "we cannot let personal feelings override what's best for the institution. Sophie has earned this recognition through her work, not her connections." Now, as he prepared for what would undoubtedly be a challenging conversation with Camilla, William felt the weight of those words. He knew that his stepmother had faced her own struggles in gaining acceptance from both the public and the royal family. Her journey from being vilified as the woman who came between Charles and Diana to becoming queen consort had been long and difficult. However, William's loyalty to Sophie and his vision for the monarchy's future outweighed his desire to avoid conflict. Sophie had never sought recognition or titles, but her quiet effectiveness had not gone unnoticed by those who understood the real work of the monarchy. Her ability to connect with people from all walks of life, combined with her genuine commitment to her charitable causes, made her an invaluable asset. The morning's final appointment was with Edward, the Earl of Wessex and Sophie's husband. William had requested this meeting to ensure that Edward understood and supported the changes that were coming. As brothers, they had grown closer over the years, particularly as they had both taken on more responsibilities within the royal family. Edward arrived precisely on time, his usual punctuality reflecting the military discipline that had shaped much of his adult life. Unlike his older brothers, Edward had always preferred to work behind the scenes, supporting the monarchy's charitable and cultural initiatives without seeking the spotlight. His marriage to Sophie had been one of the most successful royal unions of recent decades, built on mutual respect and shared values. "William," Edward said as he entered the study, "I understand you wanted to discuss Sophie's role going forward." "Indeed," William replied, gesturing for his uncle to take a seat. "I want you to know that what I'm proposing comes from a place of deep respect for Sophie's contributions and a genuine belief that she's the right person for greater responsibilities." Edward leaned forward, his interest clearly piqued. He had always been protective of his wife, knowing that she had often been overlooked despite her hard work. The idea that William was recognizing Sophie's value was both surprising and gratifying. "What exactly are you proposing?" Edward asked. William took a deep breath before outlining his plan. Sophie would be given a more prominent role in representing the monarchy at international events, particularly those focusing on women's rights and humanitarian issues. She would also be granted access to resources and support that had previously been reserved for more senior royals, allowing her to expand her charitable work significantly. More importantly, Sophie would be given a voice in key decisions affecting the monarchy's direction, something that had been lacking in her previous role. William believed that her outsider's perspective, combined with her years of experience, could provide valuable insights into how the royal family could better serve the public. Edward listened thoughtfully, occasionally nodding as William explained the details. As someone who had always believed in his wife's capabilities, he was pleased to see them finally being recognized at the highest levels. However, he was also aware of the potential complications this could create within the family dynamic. "You know this won't be easy," Edward said carefully. There are people who won't appreciate seeing the established order changed. I'm prepared for that, William replied firmly. But I refuse to let politics and personality conflicts prevent us from making the changes necessary for the monarchy's future. Sophie has earned this opportunity, and I intend to see that she gets it. The conversation continued for another hour, with Edward asking practical questions about how the transition would be managed and what support Sophie would need to succeed in her expanded role. By the end of their meeting, both men were confident that they were moving in the right direction, despite the challenges that lay ahead. As Edward prepared to leave, he turned back to William with a question that had been weighing on his mind. Have you considered how this might affect Sophie personally? She's never sought this kind of prominence. Are you certain she wants it? William smiled, remembering the conversation he'd had with Sophie herself just days earlier. When he had first broached the subject of expanding her role, she had been characteristically modest, questioning whether she was the right person for such responsibility. But, as they had talked through the possibilities and the positive impact she could have, her enthusiasm had become evident. Sophie understands the opportunity this represents, William told Edward. Not for personal aggrandizement, but for the causes she cares about and the people she wants to help. She sees this as a chance to make a real difference. As Edward left Windsor Castle that morning, he carried with him a mixture of pride and apprehension. Pride in his wife's recognition and apprehension about the storms that might lie ahead. Change, even positive change, rarely came without conflict in the royal family, where tradition and protocol held such powerful sway. William spent the remainder of the morning reviewing his notes and preparing for the afternoon's meeting with Camilla. He knew that this conversation would be crucial in determining how smoothly his plans could be implemented. Camilla's reaction would likely influence other members of the family and could either help or hinder the transition he envisioned. The Prince of Wales understood that he was taking a significant risk. By challenging the existing hierarchy and promoting Sophie, he was essentially declaring that merit and effectiveness should take precedence over traditional considerations of rank and seniority. It was a philosophy that aligned with his broader vision for a modern monarchy, but one that was certain to create tension. As the clock struck noon, William felt a sense of resolve settling over him. The decision was made, and there could be no turning back. Sophie would be elevated, regardless of the objections that might arise. The future of the monarchy depended on its ability to adapt and evolve, and this was a crucial step in that process. The afternoon meeting with Camilla would be the first real test of his determination. But William was prepared to face whatever resistance emerged, knowing that he was acting in the best interests of both the institution he would one day lead and the people it was meant to serve. The time for cautious incrementalism had passed, bold action was required, and William was ready to provide the leadership necessary to secure the monarchy's future. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the blue drawing room at Buckingham Palace as Queen Consort Camilla paced near the tall windows, her reflection flickering against the gilt-framed mirrors that had witnessed countless royal conversations over the decades. Her usually composed demeanor showed cracks of anxiety as she waited for Prince William's arrival. The ornate room, with its pale blue silk wall coverings and priceless artwork, felt unusually oppressive as she contemplated the implications of what she had learned. Lady Sarah Pemberton, Camilla's private secretary and trusted confidant for over 15 years, sat quietly at a small writing desk, pretending to review correspondence while actually observing her employer's agitation. Sarah had seen Camilla navigate numerous crises during her journey from mistress to wife to queen consort, but this particular situation seemed to strike at the very heart of everything Camilla had worked to achieve. Your Majesty, Sarah ventured carefully, perhaps it would be beneficial to approach this conversation with an open mind. Prince William has always shown respect for established protocol. Camilla stopped pacing and turned toward her secretary, her green eyes flashing with a mixture of hurt and indignation. Open mind, Sarah? The Prince of Wales is about to elevate Sophie above my position in the royal hierarchy without so much as a courtesy consultation. This isn't about protocol, this is about respect, or rather, the complete lack thereof. The Queen Consort's voice carried the weight of years of careful positioning and diplomatic maneuvering within the royal family. She had spent decades earning her place, first as Charles's companion through public scandal and media persecution, then as his wife working to gain acceptance from a skeptical public. The idea that her influence could be diminished by William's unilateral decision felt like a betrayal of everything she had sacrificed to achieve. Sarah understood her employer's frustration, but she also recognized the delicate nature of the situation.
Ma'am, might Prince William's decision be more about recognizing the Duchess of Edinburgh's specific talents rather than diminishing your role?
Your positions serve different functions within the monarchy. Different functions, Camilla repeated with a bitter laugh. Sarah, you've been with me long enough to understand how this family operates. Everything is about perception, precedence, and power. William's decision to elevate Sophie sends a clear message about whose counsel he values and whose influence he considers important for the future. Camilla moved to the window overlooking the palace gardens, where tourists gathered outside the gates, hoping for a glimpse of royal life. She thought about those people and how they perceived the royal family's internal dynamics. Public support for Sophie had always been strong, largely because of her down-to-earth nature and genuine commitment to charitable work. In contrast, Camilla's journey to acceptance had been longer and more challenging, marked by persistent comparisons to Diana and questions about her legitimacy within the royal fold. I've worked for 20 years to earn my place in this family, Camilla said, her voice softer now but no less determined. I've endured public hatred, media persecution, and family skepticism. I've proven my loyalty to Charles and my commitment to the crown. And now William thinks he can simply sidestep me in favor of someone who, while admirable, has never faced the same challenges or made the same sacrifices. The sound of approaching footsteps in the corridor outside caused both women to straighten. Sarah quickly gathered her papers and moved toward the door, understanding that this conversation needed to be private. As she reached for the handle, she paused and looked back at Camilla. Ma'am, if I may suggest, Prince William may be more receptive to collaboration than confrontation. Perhaps there's a way to find common ground that serves everyone's interests. Camilla nodded absently, her mind already focused on the conversation ahead. As Sarah left the room, the queen consort took a deep breath and assumed the regal posture that had become second nature over the years. Whatever her personal feelings about William's decision, she was determined to present herself with dignity and authority. Prince William entered the blue drawing room with the confident stride that marked him as a future king, but Camilla could see the tension in his shoulders and the careful way he assessed the room before speaking. He was prepared for resistance, which only confirmed her suspicion that this decision had been made without considering her position or feelings. Your Majesty, William said, offering a respectful bow that felt more formal than their usual family interactions. William, Camilla replied, her tone carefully neutral. I trust you understand why I requested this meeting. I believe I do, William answered, moving to stand near the fireplace where a portrait of Queen Victoria looked down with stern disapproval. You have concerns about my decision regarding Sophie's role. Camilla felt a flash of irritation at his casual reference to what she saw as a significant restructuring of royal hierarchy. Concerns? William, you've unilaterally decided to elevate the Duchess of Edinburgh to a position that undermines the established order of precedence without consulting me or your father. This isn't a minor administrative change, it's a fundamental shift in how this family operates. William's jaw tightened slightly, but his voice remained calm. The monarchy must evolve to remain relevant, Camilla. Sophie has proven herself repeatedly through her work and dedication. She deserves recognition and the resources to expand her impact. No one questions Sophie's dedication, Camilla replied sharply. But merit alone doesn't determine royal precedence, as you well know. There are traditions, protocols, and considerations that exist for good reason. Your decision sets a precedent that could destabilize everything we've worked to establish. The queen consort moved closer to William, her years of experience in royal negotiations evident in her measured approach. She understood that direct confrontation would likely strengthen his resolve, but she needed him to understand the broader implications of his actions. William, I've spent decades learning how this institution operates. The monarchy's strength comes from its stability and predictability. When we make arbitrary changes based on personal preferences, we risk undermining the very foundations that give us legitimacy. William turned to face her fully, his blue eyes reflecting the same determination Camilla had seen in his father during their most difficult years.
Personal preferences?
Camilla, this decision is based on what's best for the monarchy's future, not personal feelings. Sophie has consistently demonstrated exactly the qualities we need in our senior royals: competence, compassion, and connection with the public.
And what about loyalty? Camilla asked pointedly. What about the people who have stood by this family through its darkest moments? Does that count for nothing in your calculations?
The question hung in the air between them, heavy with implication. William understood that Camilla was referring to her own journey with Charles, the years of public ridicule and private struggle that had ultimately led to their marriage, and her position as queen consort. He also knew that his decision to elevate Sophie could be interpreted as a rejection of Camilla's contributions and sacrifices. "Your loyalty to my father and this family is not in question," William said carefully. "But loyalty alone cannot be the only criterion for determining how we structure the monarchy going forward. We need people who can effectively represent our values and connect with the public in meaningful ways." Camilla felt the implicit criticism in his words and struggled to maintain her composure.
"Are you suggesting that I cannot effectively represent royal values or connect with the public?"
William realized he had pushed too hard and attempted to soften his approach.
"Not at all.
You've made tremendous contributions, particularly in your work with literacy and domestic violence prevention. But Sophie brings different strengths and perspectives that complement the overall royal mission." "Different strengths," Camilla repeated, her voice carrying a note of skepticism.
"William, let's speak plainly.
Sophie is popular because she's never been controversial. She married Edward when the public was looking for a fresh face, and she's maintained a low profile that has protected her from criticism. That's admirable, but it's not the same as being tested and proven under fire." The queen consort's words carried the weight of her own experience navigating public opinion and media scrutiny. She had faced challenges that Sophie had never encountered, criticism that had tested her resilience and commitment in ways that few could understand. William recognized the validity of her point while maintaining his position. "You're right that Sophie hasn't faced the same level of scrutiny, but that's partly because she's been given fewer opportunities to take on prominent roles. This decision gives her the chance to prove herself on a larger stage."
"At whose expense?" Camilla asked directly. "William, royal prominence is not unlimited.
When you elevate one person's profile and resources, it inevitably affects others. Your decision to give Sophie greater visibility and authority diminishes my own position, whether you intend it or not." The conversation was reaching the heart of the matter, the zero-sum nature of royal hierarchy and public attention. William had anticipated this argument, but hearing it stated so directly forced him to confront the personal cost of his institutional decision. "Camilla, the monarchy is not a competition between family members. It's about serving the public and representing British values. Sophie's elevation doesn't diminish your contributions or your position, it strengthens the overall effectiveness of the royal family."
"Doesn't it?" Camilla challenged.
"William, when the media starts comparing Sophie's expanded role to my own work, when commentators begin discussing who was more effective or more popular, how do you think that will affect public perception of the queen consort? You're naive if you think this decision exists in a vacuum."
William fell silent for a moment, considering her words.
He had focused so intently on the benefits of elevating Sophie that he had perhaps underestimated the potential negative consequences for other family members. However, his conviction about the rightness of his decision remained unchanged.
"I understand your concerns," he said finally.
"But I believe the long-term benefits to the monarchy outweigh the short-term disruption.
Sophie's expanded role will ultimately strengthen public support for the entire royal family."
Camilla shook her head, frustration evident in her expression. "You're thinking like an idealist, not like someone who understands how this family actually functions. Every major change we've made over the years has required careful consultation, gradual implementation, and broad family support. Your approach ignores all of those lessons." "Perhaps those lessons are part of the problem," William replied, his voice taking on a sharper edge. "The monarchy's reluctance to embrace change has contributed to many of its recent challenges. Sometimes bold action is required to move the institution forward.
Bold action, Camilla repeated with evident disbelief. William, you're not just making an administrative change, you're fundamentally altering family dynamics and royal hierarchy. The consequences will extend far beyond Sophie's expanded role. The queen consort moved to a nearby chair and sat down, suddenly, looking older than her years. The stress of the conversation, combined with the broader implications of William's decision, was beginning to show in her posture and expression. "Charles knows about this, I presume?" she asked quietly. William nodded. "I discussed it with him. He has concerns, but he understands my reasoning." "And he supports your decision?" William hesitated slightly before answering. "He's agreed not to interfere with my judgment on this matter." Camilla understood the careful language. Charles had likely expressed reservations about the decision but had ultimately deferred to William's authority as heir to the throne. It was a pattern she had observed before: Charles's tendency to avoid direct confrontation with his sons, even when he disagreed with their choices. "So I'm to accept this decision without any input or consideration of its impact on my position," Camilla said, her voice heavy with resignation mixed with anger. "You're to trust my judgment and support what's best for the monarchy," William replied firmly. "Just as you've always supported my father's decisions, even when they were difficult or controversial." The comparison stung, particularly because Camilla recognized its accuracy. She had indeed supported Charles through numerous difficult decisions, often at personal cost to herself. Now William was asking for the same loyalty and support for a decision that directly affected her position and influence. "This is different, William," she said quietly. "Charles's decisions were about his own role and responsibilities. Your decision affects my standing within the family and the public's perception of my value to the monarchy." William moved closer, his expression softening slightly as he recognized the personal pain behind her formal objections. "Camilla, your value to this family and to the public is not diminished by Sophie's advancement. You've earned your place through years of service and dedication. Nothing about that changes." "Everything about that changes," Camilla replied sadly. "William, you may not intend to send a message about my relative importance, but that's exactly what this decision communicates. You're telling the world that when you have important work to be done, you turn to Sophie, not to me." The queen consort stood and walked back to the window, her reflection now showing a woman who looked defeated despite her attempts to maintain dignity. The afternoon light was beginning to fade, casting the room in shadows that seemed to mirror her mood. "I've spent 20 years proving myself worthy of being in this family," she continued, her voice barely above a whisper. "I've endured public humiliation, media attacks, and family skepticism. I've worked tirelessly to support Charles and represent the crown with dignity. And now, when I should be enjoying the respect and recognition that comes with being queen consort, I'm told that someone else is better suited for the important work ahead." William felt a pang of sympathy for his stepmother, understanding for the first time the personal cost of his institutional decision. However, his determination to proceed with his plan remained unchanged, even as he struggled to find words that might soften the blow. "Camilla, this isn't about replacing you or diminishing your importance. It's about utilizing all of our family's talents in the most effective way possible. Sophie's strengths complement your own, they don't compete with them." "How naive you are," Camilla said with a sad smile. "William, in this family, everything is competition. Every public appearance, every charitable patronage, every media story, it all contributes to a complex calculus of relevance and influence. Your decision tips that calculus away from me and towards Sophie, regardless of your intentions." The room fell silent as both of them contemplated the implications of their conversation. William understood that he had failed to convince Camilla to support his decision willingly, while Camilla realized that her objections would not change his mind. The battle lines were drawn, and the consequences would extend far beyond this single afternoon. As the silence stretched, both of them began to consider their next moves in what was clearly becoming a more complex family drama than either had anticipated. The golden afternoon light filtered through the tall windows of Bagshot Park as Sophie, Duchess of Edinburgh, sat in her private sitting room, a cup of Earl Grey growing cold on the side table as she stared at the formal letter that had arrived by royal courier just hours earlier. The weight of the parchment seemed insignificant compared to the magnitude of what it contained: Prince William's official notification of her expanded role within the monarchy, complete with detailed responsibilities that would transform her from a supporting player to a central figure in the royal family's future. Her hands trembled slightly as she read through the document for the third time, each word carrying implications that both thrilled and terrified her. After years of working quietly in the background, content to support Edward and contribute to charitable causes without seeking recognition, she was being thrust into a prominence that would change everything about her life and role within the royal family. Edward entered the room quietly, having spent the morning in meetings with his own staff to discuss the practical implications of Sophie's elevation. His face showed a mixture of pride and concern as he observed his wife's contemplative mood. They had been married for over 20 years, and he could read her emotions with the accuracy that came from deep partnership and mutual understanding. "The reality is beginning to sink in, isn't it?" he asked gently, settling into the chair opposite her near the fireplace that had warmed countless family conversations over the years. Sophie looked up from the letter, her blue eyes reflecting the complexity of her emotions. "Edward, I've spent my entire royal life being grateful for the opportunity to serve without seeking the spotlight. I've been comfortable in the supporting role, happy to make a difference without the scrutiny that comes with prominence. This changes everything." Edward reached across to take her hand, understanding the magnitude of what she was feeling. He had married a successful public relations professional who had given up her career to support his royal duties, never complaining about the sacrifice or seeking greater recognition for her contributions. The idea that she was now being asked to step into a much larger role was both an honor and a burden. "You've earned this recognition, Sophie. William wouldn't have made this decision if he didn't believe you were the right person for expanded responsibilities. Your work over the years hasn't gone unnoticed, even if it hasn't always received the public attention it deserved." Sophie stood and moved to the window overlooking the grounds where their children had played as youngsters, where family gatherings had created memories that sustained them through the challenges of royal life. The peaceful setting seemed at odds with the upheaval that was about to transform their existence. "That's exactly what worries me," she admitted. "Edward, I've been able to do meaningful work precisely because I haven't been in the spotlight. When you're not front and center, you can take risks, speak honestly, and connect with people without every word being analyzed and criticized. Once William's announcement is made public, everything I do will be scrutinized through a completely different lens." Edward understood her concerns, having observed the way media attention had affected other members of their family over the years. The freedom to work effectively often diminished in proportion to public prominence, as every action became subject to political interpretation and media analysis. "But think of the opportunities, darling," he said, rising to join her at the window. "The causes you care about will have access to resources and attention they've never had before. Your voice on women's rights, on disability advocacy, on mental health support, imagine the impact you could have with a larger platform." Sophie's expression softened as she considered his words. Throughout her royal career, she had been passionate about causes that often struggled for funding and public attention. Her work with organizations supporting survivors of sexual violence had been particularly close to her heart, though it had often taken place away from public view due to the sensitive nature of the issues involved. "The Safe Haven Foundation," she murmured, thinking of the organization she had quietly supported for over a decade. "With greater resources and official backing, we could expand their services nationwide. The impact could be transformational for thousands of women." Edward smiled, seeing the spark of possibility beginning to outweigh her concerns. "Exactly. And your work with disability employment programs, your advocacy for gender equality in developing countries, all of it could reach a completely different scale with the backing that comes with your new position." A soft knock on the door interrupted their conversation, and Sophie's private secretary, Caroline Hartwell, entered with a carefully neutral expression that both Edward and Sophie had learned to recognize as a sign of potentially challenging news. "Your Royal Highness," Caroline addressed Sophie formally, "I've received several calls from media outlets requesting comment on rumors about changes to your role within the royal family. It appears that word of Prince William's decision is beginning to leak." Sophie and Edward exchanged a look of resignation mixed with concern.
They had hoped for more time to prepare before the news became public, understanding that the initial wave of media coverage would set the tone for how the elevation was perceived by the public.
What are they saying specifically?
Sophie asked, settling back into her chair with the weary acceptance that came from years of dealing with media speculation. Caroline consulted her notes carefully. The reports vary, but most suggest that you're being given a significantly expanded role that places you among the most senior working royals. Some outlets are describing it as Prince William's first major decision as heir apparent, while others are focusing on the implications for other family members.
Sophie felt a chill of apprehension. Other family members? Are they specifically mentioning anyone?
There's considerable speculation about how the Queen Consort views the changes, Caroline replied diplomatically.
Some reports suggest there may be tension within the family about the restructuring of royal responsibilities.
Edward's expression darkened. He had hoped that William's decision could be implemented smoothly, without creating public perception of family conflict. The idea that Sophie's elevation was being framed as controversial or divisive was exactly what they had feared. We need to get ahead of this narrative, Edward said firmly.
Sophie's expanded role should be presented as a natural evolution reflecting her proven capabilities, not as a controversial power shift within the family.
Sophie stood and began pacing, her mind working through the public relations challenges that lay ahead. Her background in communications had never left her, and she understood better than most how initial media framing could persist regardless of subsequent facts or explanations.
Caroline, what's the timeline for Prince William's official announcement? She asked.
According to the palace, the formal announcement will be made tomorrow morning, followed by a detailed briefing about your new responsibilities and the reasoning behind the decision. Sophie nodded, her strategic mind already working through the challenges and opportunities of the next few days.
We'll need to be prepared for immediate follow-up interviews and appearances.
The public needs to see that this decision is positive for everyone involved, not divisive or controversial. A second interruption came as Edward's private secretary entered with news that Prince William himself was requesting a conference call to discuss coordination of the announcement and media strategy. The pace of events was accelerating, forcing decisions that would normally take weeks to consider. As the call was arranged, Sophie found herself reflecting on the irony of her situation. She had spent years perfecting the art of effective work without public recognition, and now she was being asked to step into a role where public recognition would be constant and potentially overwhelming. "Edward," she said quietly as they waited for the call to connect, "I need to know that you're completely supportive of this. Your role will change too, and not necessarily in ways you've chosen or wanted."
Edward's response was immediate and firm. "Sophie, I've watched you work miracles in the background for 20 years.
I've seen you comfort grieving families, advocate for forgotten causes, and represent our values with grace and effectiveness.
If William believes you're ready for greater responsibilities, then I believe it too."
The call with William began with the Prince of Wales expressing his appreciation for their willingness to take on expanded duties, but it quickly moved to the practical challenges of managing the announcement and its aftermath. "Sophie," William said, his voice carrying through the secure line with unusual warmth, "I want you to know that this decision comes from my absolute confidence in your abilities and judgment. However, I won't pretend that the transition will be without challenges." "Your Royal Highness," Sophie replied formally, though they had been on friendly terms for years, "I'm honored by your confidence, but I'd be lying if I said I wasn't concerned about the implications for family harmony and public perception." William's pause suggested he was carefully considering his words. "There will undoubtedly be some resistance and criticism, both from within the family and from media commentators who prefer the status quo. But I believe the long-term benefits far outweigh the short-term disruption."
Edward leaned forward to speak into the phone. "William, how do we address concerns about family unity?"
"The last thing any of us wants is for Sophie's advancement to be perceived as creating division. That's exactly why coordination is crucial," William replied.
"We need to present this as a strengthening of the royal family's capabilities, not as a replacement or diminishment of anyone's existing role. Sophie's elevation should be seen as additive to our overall effectiveness."
Sophie appreciated William's diplomatic language, but she was also aware of the practical reality.
With respect, Your Royal Highness, royal prominence often functions as a zero-sum game in public perception.
When one person's profile rises, others inevitably appear diminished, regardless of our intentions. Which is precisely why your approach to this new role will be so important, William responded.
Sophie, your natural inclination to work collaboratively and avoid seeking personal credit will serve you well. This isn't about personal ambition, it's about institutional effectiveness.
The conversation continued for another 30 minutes, covering everything from the specific wording of the announcement to the scheduling of Sophie's first major public appearances in her expanded role. By the time the call ended, all three participants understood that they were embarking on a significant change that would test both Sophie's capabilities and the royal family's ability to adapt and evolve. As evening approached, Sophie found herself alone in her sitting room again, the formal letter still resting on the side table beside her long cold tea. The weight of the decision was no longer abstract. Tomorrow would bring public announcement and the beginning of a completely new chapter in her royal life. She thought about the organization she had quietly supported over the years, the individuals she had met during private visits that never made the news, the causes she had advocated for without seeking recognition. All of that would change now, as every action would carry the weight and attention that came with senior royal status. Her phone buzzed with a text message from her daughter Louise, who was away at university but had apparently heard rumors about changes in her mother's role.
Mom, are the stories true? Are you going to be more involved in royal duties? I'm so proud of you.
Sophie smiled for the first time that day, realizing that regardless of the challenges ahead, she had the support of the people who mattered most. Edward's unwavering confidence, William's trust in her abilities, and her children's pride in her accomplishments provided a foundation of strength that would sustain her through whatever difficulties lay ahead. The decision was made, the announcement prepared, and the future set in motion. Tomorrow would bring the beginning of a new era, both for Sophie personally and for the monarchy's evolution toward a more merit-based approach to royal responsibilities. Whether that evolution would strengthen or strain the institution remained to be seen, but Sophie was determined to prove herself worthy of the confidence William had placed in her. As she finally picked up the formal letter one last time before filing it away, Sophie made a mental note to call her parents in the morning. They had supported her through every major transition in her life, from career woman to royal wife to working mother. Now they would witness her most significant transformation yet, as she stepped from the shadows into a prominence that would define the rest of her royal career. The next chapter was about to begin, and Sophie, Duchess of Edinburgh, was as ready as anyone could be for such a monumental change. The morning of the announcement dawned crisp and clear over London, with autumn sunlight streaming through the windows of Buckingham Palace's media centre as press officers made final preparations for what they knew would be one of the most significant royal announcements in recent memory. The carefully orchestrated release would reshape public understanding of the monarchy's direction under Prince William's emerging leadership, but the full implications of the change were still unknown to most of the participants in the unfolding drama. At Clarence House, King Charles sat in his private study, reading the final version of the announcement that would be released in less than 2 hours. His withered hands held the document with the careful attention he gave to all matters affecting the monarchy's future, but his expression revealed the internal conflict between his role as king and his position as husband to a woman who felt deeply wounded by recent developments. Charles had spent a sleepless night listening to Camilla's concerns, her hurt feelings, and her fears about how the elevation of Sophie would affect her own standing within the royal hierarchy. As king, he understood and even supported William's reasoning. Sophie had indeed proven herself through years of dedicated service, and the monarchy needed to evolve to remain relevant. As a husband, however, he struggled with the pain this decision was causing the woman who had stood by him through his own most difficult years. The sound of Camilla's heels clicking on the marble floor announced her approach, and Charles looked up as she entered the study with the carefully controlled expression she had perfected during her years of navigating royal politics. She was dressed impeccably in a navy blue suit that conveyed both authority and dignity, but Charles could see the tension in her shoulders and the slight tightness around her eyes that spoke to her emotional state. "The announcement goes out in 90 minutes, she said without preamble, settling into the chair across from his desk with the measured grace that had become second nature over the years. "Yes," Charles replied simply, unsure how to navigate the conversation that was clearly coming. Camilla studied her husband's face, reading the conflict there with the accuracy that came from decades of partnership. You support William's decision, she stated rather than asked. Charles set down the announcement and leaned back in his chair, suddenly, looking every one of his 75 years. I support the principle behind his decision, yes. The monarchy must be able to reward merit and utilize the talents of all family members effectively.
But? Camilla prompted, hearing the unspoken reservation in his voice.
But I wish he had found a way to accomplish his goals without creating the perception of displacement or diminishment of your contributions, Charles admitted. You've earned your place through sacrifice and dedication that few people understand or appreciate. Camilla felt a wave of gratitude toward her husband, even as she recognized the impossible position he was in. As king, he could hardly oppose his heir's vision for the monarchy's future, even if that vision created personal difficulties for his own wife. Charles, I need you to understand something, she said quietly.
This isn't just about my feelings being hurt or my ego being bruised.
This decision sets a precedent that could fundamentally change how the monarchy operates.
If merit alone determines prominence and resources, what happens to the stability and predictability that have been our greatest strengths?
Charles nodded thoughtfully, understanding her concern. The monarchy's power had always rested partly on tradition and continuity, on the idea that change came slowly and carefully rather than through sudden shifts in direction or priority. William believes that our greatest strength must be our ability to adapt and remain relevant, Charles replied. He sees Sophie's elevation as proof that the monarchy rewards effectiveness and dedication, regardless of birth order or traditional precedents.
And what happens when the next heir decides that someone else deserves elevation? Camilla asked pointedly. What happens to the people who are displaced by these merit-based decisions? Do we simply cast them aside when they're no longer considered optimal for their roles?
The question highlighted the broader implications of William's decision that went far beyond Sophie's specific situation. If the monarchy was moving toward a more flexible, merit-based approach to roles and responsibilities, it would necessarily mean that traditional positions and expectations would become less secure. Charles had no easy answer for her concern, partly because he shared it himself. The balance between necessary evolution and destabilizing change was delicate, and William's decision pushed the monarchy closer to that line than it had been in generations. Meanwhile, at Windsor Castle, Prince William was making final preparations for a day that he knew would test his leadership and vision for the monarchy's future. He had scheduled a series of calls with senior palace officials, family members, and close advisors to ensure that everyone understood both the decision and the reasoning behind it. Catherine joined him in his study, carrying their youngest child who had awakened early and was content to sit quietly while his parents discussed the day ahead. The presence of their son served as a reminder that William's decisions would shape the monarchy that his children would inherit, adding weight to choices that were already heavy with consequence.
Are you prepared for the reaction? Catherine asked, settling into a chair while their son played with a toy that had belonged to William himself as a child.
As prepared as anyone can be for something like this, William replied, his tone suggesting confidence mixed with apprehension.
I believe in the decision, Catherine, but I'm not naive about the criticism that will come.
Catherine understood that the criticism would come from multiple directions: traditionalists who opposed any change to established protocol, family members who felt displaced or ignored, and media commentators who thrived on royal controversy. William would need to weather all of it while maintaining his conviction about the rightness of his choice.
Sophie is ready? Catherine asked.
As ready as she can be, William answered. She understands the challenges ahead, but she also understands the opportunity to make a real difference. That's what convinced me that this was the right decision. Her focus remains on service rather than personal advancement.
At Bagshot Park, Sophie was indeed making her own final preparations, though hers involved more personal reflection than administrative coordination.
She had awakened before dawn and spent an hour walking through the gardens that had provided peace and perspective during 20 years of royal life, trying to prepare mentally for a day that would change everything about her public existence. Edward found her in the garden as the sun fully cleared the horizon, still wearing her morning robe but clearly deep in thought about the magnitude of what lay ahead. He approached quietly, understanding that she needed these moments of solitude to gather her strength for the challenges of the day. Second thoughts, he asked gently, though he already knew the answer from the determined set of her shoulders.
Constant thoughts, Sophie replied with a slight smile. But, not second thoughts, if that makes sense. I'm apprehensive about the change, but I'm also excited about the possibilities. When will I ever get another chance to make this kind of impact on the causes I care about?
Edward moved to stand beside her, both of them looking out over the grounds where they had built their family life away from the constant scrutiny that affected more prominent royals. Soon, that relative privacy would be a thing of the past, replaced by the intense public attention that came with senior royal status. "The children are excited," Edward said, referring to their adult children who had called the previous evening to express their support and pride. "Louise said she's always known you were capable of this kind of role, she's just glad the rest of the world is finally going to see it." Sophie felt a surge of warmth at the memory of their children's reactions. Throughout their upbringing, she had tried to shield them from the more demanding aspects of royal life while still instilling an understanding of service and dedication. Their enthusiasm for her expanded role was perhaps the most meaningful endorsement she could receive. "Edward," she said quietly, "I need you to promise me something. If this becomes too overwhelming, if the pressure affects our family in ways we haven't anticipated, you'll tell me honestly. I don't want my ambition or sense of duty to damage what we've built together." Edward's response was immediate and firm. "Sophie, you've never had an ambitious bone in your body when it comes to royal status. Everything you've done has been about service and making a difference. If you can do more good with a larger platform, then that's what you should do. Our family is strong enough to handle whatever comes." As the morning progressed, phone calls began arriving from friends, colleagues, and representatives of the organizations Sophie had supported over the years. Word of the announcement was spreading rapidly through royal and charitable circles, generating a mixture of excitement and speculation about what the changes would mean. Caroline Hartwell, Sophie's private secretary, was fielding calls from media outlets seeking advance comment on the announcement, though palace protocol required all responses to wait until after the official release. The level of interest was already exceeding expectations, suggesting that public reaction would be significant. "Your Royal Highness," Caroline said during a brief break between calls, "the response from the charitable sector has been overwhelmingly positive. Organizations you've worked with are excited about the increased attention and resources that may become available." Sophie felt a sense of validation in hearing that the people closest to her work understood the potential benefits of her elevation. Their support would be crucial during the challenging period of transition that lay ahead. At exactly 10 o'clock Greenwich Mean Time, the official announcement was released simultaneously to all major media outlets, royal correspondents, and palace social media channels. The carefully crafted statement described Sophie's expanded role as a recognition of her outstanding contributions to royal duties and her demonstrated ability to represent British values both domestically and internationally. The announcement detailed specific areas where Sophie would take on increased responsibilities, including representing the monarchy at major international women's rights conferences, leading expanded charitable initiatives focused on gender equality and disability advocacy, and serving as a senior advisor on royal family charitable strategy. Within minutes of the release, royal correspondents were offering analysis and commentary that would shape public understanding of the decision. Most initial responses focused on Sophie's qualifications and track record, though several reports noted the precedent-setting nature of elevating a royal based primarily on merit rather than traditional hierarchy. The BBC's royal correspondent described the decision as Prince William's first major statement about his vision for the monarchy's future, while Sky News characterized it as a bold move that prioritizes effectiveness over tradition. The reactions were largely positive, though some commentary noted potential tensions within the royal family. Social media response was immediate and overwhelming, with royal watchers expressing opinions that ranged from enthusiastic support to cautious concern about changing established protocols. Sophie's name began trending on Twitter within an hour of the announcement, with most comments praising her previous work and expressing excitement about her expanded role. However, not all responses were positive. Some traditionalists expressed concern about abandoning established precedents, while others questioned whether the decision created unfair advantages for certain family members over others. A few commentators specifically mentioned potential tensions with Queen Consort Camilla, though these remained largely speculative. By noon, it was clear that William's announcement had achieved its intended impact, generating significant public discussion about the monarchy's direction while positioning Sophie as a central figure in its evolution. The decision had successfully framed her elevation as a positive development for both the royal family and the causes she represented. Sophie spent the afternoon in meetings with palace officials, planning her first major public appearances in her expanded role and discussing the logistics of significantly increased public duties. The scale of change was becoming evident as her calendar filled with international trips, major charitable events, and high-profile speaking engagements that would have been unthinkable in her previous position. At Clarence House, Camilla watched the media coverage with a mixture of resignation and sadness, understanding that her fears about public perception were already being realized. Commentary about Sophie's elevation inevitably included references to her own role, with several reports noting that the Queen Consort had not been mentioned in the announcement of expanded royal responsibilities. Charles found her in their private sitting room as the afternoon news broadcasts began featuring extended coverage of the announcement and its implications. She sat quietly watching the reports, her expression carefully neutral but her hands clasped tightly in her lap. "The coverage is largely positive," Charles offered, settling beside her on the sofa. "For Sophie, yes," Camilla replied without looking away from the television. "And she deserves positive coverage. She's an admirable woman who will undoubtedly excel in her expanded role. But you'll notice that my contributions are being described in the past tense, as if my usefulness to the monarchy is now historical rather than ongoing." Charles could offer no convincing argument against her observation, because the media coverage was indeed creating that impression, however, unintentionally. The focus on Sophie's future potential seemed to diminish attention to Camilla's current contributions, exactly as she had predicted. As evening approached, the full impact of William's decision was becoming clear to everyone involved. Sophie had been successfully positioned as a rising star within the royal family, her elevation generating positive publicity and public support for the monarchy's evolution. However, the personal cost to family relationships was also becoming evident, particularly in terms of Camilla's sense of displacement and diminished influence. The decision would ultimately be judged by its long-term impact on both the monarchy's effectiveness and its internal harmony. William had achieved his immediate goal of recognizing Sophie's capabilities and expanding her role, but the broader consequences for family dynamics and institutional stability would unfold over months and years to come. Sophie herself ended the day with a phone call to her parents, sharing both her excitement about the opportunities ahead and her determination to prove worthy of the confidence William had placed in her. Tomorrow would bring the first day of her new life as a senior working royal, with all the challenges and opportunities that role would bring. The monarchy had taken a significant step toward a more merit-based approach to royal duties, but whether that step strengthened or strained the institution would depend on how successfully all the participants navigated the changes ahead. The bold decision had been made. Now came the more difficult work of making it successful.